is strictly on the urban interface code about what it is, what the requirements are, who's best suited to perform it, and how we go from there. So what we're handing out is the exact slide we're going to present from. So everything that we're going to go through in the slide is taken verbatim from... Yep, we sure. So everything that we're going to speak to is verbatim from the code or the state code as to what the requirements are. So currently, the county has adopted the 2006 edition of the Urban Wildland Interface that's set forth by the state as per the forestry, fire, and state lands. So we're going to move on to the next slide and talk about what the urban interface is. So as you can see from there, the urban interface from the definitions in Chapter 2 of the code, line, area, or zone where structures or other human development meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuel. So basically your wildland area is anywhere that you have a potential for destruction of property, whether that's infrastructure, homes, rangelands, watersheds, anywhere where a fire uncontrolled would be a detriment to the county and at a significant cost. Section 302 designates how the map and how it is set forth. So in 302.1, the legislative body shall declare the wildland urban interface. So this gets into the code official and the forestry, fire, and state lands representative for our area sets forth what the urban interface is. This is done through expertise about topography, vegetative fuels, how a fire is going to behave in a slot canyon if it's a chimney, what's going to happen and what needs to be mitigated out through the code to prevent a catastrophic wildfire. So in 302.1, the legislative, you gentlemen, are the one that ultimately decide what is or is not in the map. The code official and the FFSL representative draft the map and then present it, and it's either approved or reviewed or redone until you gentlemen find it satisfactory. So this is done in cooperation with the state. It's not a one-department job, it's not a one-man job, it's done through the expertise of multiple people so that we can make sure we're preventing wildfires before they become catastrophic. As we move into the next slide, we'll show the current map. So anything on the outside of the yellow line is the current adopted wildland urban interface area. Anything on the outside of the blue line was the map that we drafted up 3 to 4 years ago to address some concerns we had with the line that designates the urban interface, splitting subdivisions in half, splitting lots in half to provide some clarification. So the reasoning for going to this new map that we tried to start working on 3 to 4 years ago is every so often the state puts out a CARS report. So CARS stands for Communities at Risk. They'll go through, and that's what we're looking at the top. It rates it on a number scale as to the hazard that is posed to the area that's rated. So as you look through, 8 through 11 is high, 12 is extreme. 12 is the highest that we can get. It takes on fire occurrence, fuel hazard, values protected, as well as the fire protection capabilities. As we read through this, we can see the only thing that we really have control of at this point is our fire protection capabilities. That's the only thing. We can buy more engines, buy more tankers, do everything there to bring the score down. But as we all know, we check the rating that the state gives to these areas. Greener Hills is a 10, Timber Lake's an 11, the Girls Camp's an 11, as well as Lake Creek Farms. And these are brinking on an extreme hazard, the highest hazard that the state designates to any subdivision. Every year we're adding infrastructure, we're adding values protected, the fuel hazard continues to grow and increase, so every place that they rate is constantly increasing in hazard if nothing's done.
You mentioned inside the blue line, or outside the blue line, that's the map that has been adopted.
No, anything outside of the yellow line is the currently adopted. Outside of the blue line is the map that the fire district presented 3 to 4 years ago. It was directed to work with the building department to adjust some of the concerns.
So they would move to the yellow, and it's what's been adopted.
The yellow has been since 2006 upon the adoption of the code.
Okay.
The blue is what we feel would be more protected. We follow lot lines, roads, anything that is a definable feature so that we can say, okay, if you're here, you're in it. If you're here, you're not. We're not splitting lots in half. It solves a lot of problems. On the flip side of that, from a fire suppression standpoint, if we have it run down a road, we can make a stand at that road. If we have a fire on the opposite side, we can put fire trucks, as we did at the Fox Bay fire, all the way down Alpine Avenue and have an anchor point that we can stop that fire from spreading.
Much appreciated. And that's technicality maybe, but you listed the girls' camp of it went down to 12, and you also let your farm to 12. So to me it seems, because of the proximity to protection, certainly the vegetation's less. Why is it that high in Lake Creek Farms?
Lake Creek Farms, if you drive down 1200 south, right between 4200 and 4800, your oak brush is 5 feet taller than me. You get a fire in the scrub oak. We're not allowed, or it's not recommended, to put an engine next to anything that is fuel height that or above, because you have a 4-foot shrub, it's going to put 6 feet of flame length off of that. Anything above that technically needs to be fought with aircraft. I believe it was 10-ish years ago when we actually brought an air tanker in and dumped it right through the middle of Lake Creek Farms.
So it's fuel types, not necessarily proximity, that's more important.
Yeah, the proximity to a fire station bears a little bit into it, but the fuel and the amount of dollar loss that would be affected if we had a catastrophic wildfire.
So this shows a 10, but you're saying it's now been upgraded to 12.
It's a 10, but every year that we add structures, so every $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 house adds to that score, as well as the vegetated fuel continues to grow. If uncontrolled, it's eventually going to work its way to a 12.
Okay.
And once you're at a 12, you can't get much higher than a 12. That's their max rating. So that was the reasoning behind readdressing the map. Or the wildland code says it needs to be addressed every 3 years or as needed. We felt there was some areas we could define it in to make it a little clearer for those that are building a house, whether they're a general contractor or a homeowner, just to streamline the process. And on the next slide, out of the chapter 1, the administrative portion of the code, 101.3, so the objective of the entire wildland fire code is to mitigate the risk to life and structures from intrusion of fire from wildland, basically from structure to structure, as well as a structure to the wildland. Those are the 3 ways you're going to have a catastrophic wildfire. You can have a lightning strike that starts the brush on fire and goes and starts taking structures. You can have a house fire that starts, lights it off, in any number of situations. So those are the objectives to prevent the damage to homes as well as the wildland. So it also talks in that section, this code shall supplement the jurisdiction's building and fire codes. The wildland code is a standalone code. It's not a fire code, it's not a building code. It takes a lot of every portion of it, some more than others, and puts it into one code as to what we need to do to prevent a catastrophic wildfire. So the important part is shall supplement the jurisdiction's building and fire codes, because everything that we do lessens the likelihood of a fire. Then in 101.6, all building structures, landscape materials, vegetation, defensible space, or other devices or safeguards, basically anything that we've done to mitigate the risk of a wildfire needs to be maintained. Not only needs to be, but shall be. There's few wordings that use in code: may, shall, and other items like that. May, you can, you don't have to. Shall doesn't give an option. It has to be maintained. If we put in defensible space and don't maintain it, any farmer knows that you cut the alfalfa, grows back. You cut sagebrush, grows back. We have to constantly maintain it. And as we move on to the next slide, the importance of the code official, as designated by you gentlemen, really bears a lot of importance. You can't have anybody just coming in and enforcing fire codes. The county has delegated that to the fire district. You can't have anybody coming in and enforcing building codes. You've designated that to the building department. So designating who is the authorized code official grants them powers to maintain the defensible space and gives them more ground to stand on, more firm ground to stand on to prevent a catastrophic wildfire. Then as you go down in 102, authorities of the code official is authorized to administer and enforce this code. Whoever you gentlemen pick to enforce the code is the person that is tasked with it and liable to enforce the code so that we don't have a catastrophic wildfire. Then as we move, just a brief overview of the chapters. This is, in a nutshell, the entire Wildland Urban Interface Code. So you have the Chapter 1, the administration that we've been going through, 103.1, 103.6, everything about how to adopt it, what it needs to be, the authorities of the code official, as well as permits. In the permit section of it, it says what can and cannot be done in the Wildland Urban Interface as far as grinding, welding, taken verbatim from the fire code as to what is and is not, and gives the code official special powers as to what is allowed in the urban interface. So then Chapter 2 just clarifies Chapters 1 through 7. Chapter 3 is designating it, and this falls to you gentlemen, as well as the code official and the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands representative to set what the map is. Chapter 4 deals with access, deals with water sources, as well as the fire protection plan. We know what our apparatus do. We know what water is needed to put out a fire in heavy timber, in oak brush, in sage, in cedars, in any number of items. Fire protection plan. We have a full-time fire warden, Mr. Morgan, that works continually with developments to implement it and work through to prevent catastrophic fires. In Chapter 5, you have the special building construction. This is set out by the architect, the engineer, or the design professional due to the hazard severity form as to how high the hazard is, how far the defensible space, and what type of construction. Chapter 6 talks about automatic sprinklers. We've been enforcing it since way before my time that anything in the Wildland Urban Interface is needed to provide fire protection through fire sprinklers. You have defensible space. The maintenance is really the major concern of what this issue is. If you don't maintain the defensible space, 20 years from now, it's like it didn't even happen. Spark arresters on fireplaces, preventing any solid fuel-fired fireplaces from igniting a fire. Propane. Fire district already enforces the installation of propane tanks. Storage of firewood. If you store firewood under a deck, you're drastically higher to lose that structure because you're adding fuel load under it. And then you go through the reference standards in Appendix A through H. We've adopted C, the fire hazard severity form. There are other appendices that whoever the code official is allowed to adopt through the legislative body that allows for clear brush around roads. Just gives us more ability to, if we can't suppress a fire, to evacuate the occupants and reduce the risk to loss of life or limb. Appendix C is the building department code, deals with the subdivision, deals with ingress, egress, width of road, accessibility, road terminus, street signs. All of this is addressed by the fire code and enforced at this point by the fire district. Then it goes to the vegetation. Mr. Morgan spends lots of time studying fuels, studying how a fire will react on topography, on aspect of the slope, what type of fuel it is, and how it will behave. Topography. Once again, Mr. Morgan knows how a fire is going to behave in the wildland. D talks about the roofing materials that's set forth by the IBC that's designated by the design professional, by the architect or engineer. E is the fire protection. We know how much water it takes to put out a fire, whether that's a structure fire, car fire, snowmobile fire, or a raging wildfire. We know how much we need for helicopters to dump in if we do have to go through a defensive attack. And F, once again, the design professional specifies as per Appendices C what is needed. Then as the utilities and gas, like I said, the fire district already enforces the propane inspections. And on the next one, we'll find the definition again of the code official. It's the official designated by the jurisdiction, by you gentlemen, who would be more apt and more qualified to enforce the wildland code to prevent a catastrophic wildfire. So we require a landscape plan up front. It's required to be maintained. Mr. Morgan, like I said, works year-round with developers and individual homeowners to provide defensible space, but has very little to no say in what goes in at the inception. And as far as who is tasked with enforcing it, Utah currently, as of 2013 statistics, has 268 fire departments. 75% are volunteer, meaning they lack the personnel to enforce the wildland code. Because when we heard Mr. Vickers speak, it's up to you gentlemen to decide who is more able and capable of enforcing the fire code, who has more expertise. It doesn't come down to what Clint thinks or anything. It's what you gentlemen feel is needed to there. So the legislator adopts it, they adopt the code. It's up to the council to adopt it if they want. Like we read earlier, they may adopt it if we choose to. And if we do adopt it, just like the building and fire codes, it's up to you gentlemen to decide who is more qualified to adopt it. So we're going to go to the next slide, and State Code 15A2-103 talks about may be adopted by a local compliance agency. It doesn't say who the compliance agency is in the definitions. It just speaks to whoever issues permits, construction's regulated under any code, or B, any other agency of the state or its political subdivisions specifically empowered to enforce compliance with the codes. That comes back to whoever's specifically enforcing it, as per you gentlemen. And then in wrapping up real quick, the Rockport fire we had 2 years ago, we have an example of the importance of enforcing defensible space. We can see on the left, you've got pretty significant slope. You can see the vegetation's about the same on both of them. If we can see on the right, you have the trees that are planted after. Even the tiniest trees, about 5 foot tall, are enough to destroy the whole house. So that's what we're dealing with, is the importance of who can and should enforce this code so that we prevent any type of fire from destroying entire subdivisions. And other than that, we can entertain any questions if you gentlemen have any.
Very good presentation. A lot of good information.
Anything further?
Did we adopt appendices B or not?
Appendices B is in the fire code, and yes, we have.
Could you show us where?
Sure.
So what is it step forward?
Appendix B,
Yeah.
the type of construction that Quinn talked about. So, brick building is obviously going to be harder to burn than a wood building. So, the brick building is going to require less fire flow. Your wood building is going to require more. Basically, appendices in this allows that if you sprinkle a building and you do a wood construction, you're allowed a 50% reduction in the required fire flow.
We did that in 2004,
I believe. I think it was July 7, 2004. We can get the minutes and voting record on it. Anything further?
Any other questions, council? Appreciate both presentations.
Thank you.
Very informative, good information. Steve and Mike, I guess you were the committee working on this. Where do we, will you, based on this, do we go forward to the council, or do you guys want to bring a recommendation to us?
I've got a few thoughts. I'm going to put them on the board so we can kind of clarify a few things, because there's a lot of information. We can look at that. Steve probably got some thoughts as well. But after this is all said and done, I'm thinking maybe even a one-page sheet from each of them suggesting what they would like to see happen as far as the code official and things like that. And maybe we even have our county attorney's office just weigh in on some of the information to kind of compare the two, because we are trying to interpret the code and the ordinances, and there's a few things here that they see it one way and you see it a different way, and so we want to clarify some things. So let me just take a second, throw some things on the board, because I think it might bring it all together. I'm a visual kind of guy. I need to see those things to kind of see if we're talking about everything. So maybe Steve.
If that's what everybody thinks.
moving interface code we've talked about. The map, we've got two boundaries, and things like that. And of course, the code official.
We don't really have two boundaries, do we? It's the yellow
We've
map.
got the yellow one, and then we've got the proposed blue one, right? Okay. So we've got
We have never adopted.
It's only the yellow.
So I guess that's one thing that needs to be decided on there, the blue and the yellow.
Can I just comment on that, because I signed the original map. It was done because the state was asking us to do something to define where the state was going to bill us the way the insurance program ran for the state. It took all areas outside of municipal boundaries, and it took values of those properties and determined the insurance amounts with the state. We drew it solely for the insurance purposes. We didn't consult with the fire department or anybody else for the actual combustible.
Or the building department.
Or the building, yeah, it was drawn for the insurance purposes.
Blue line was?
Yeah, the yellow
one. The yellow one.
It wasn't, it didn't consider all of the things that we're talking about today. It was strictly done for that purpose at the time. But also at the time, that was the issue.
So, Mike, is it fair to say that you would, as the manager, recommend that we take a look at the map and see if it needs to be, we need to look at that blue line or whatever the line is and re-look at that?
Our sole purpose was to minimize the value to the state. We were the second highest paying county in the state of Utah into the suppression.
We now have a different program.
And now there's a different program, it's a totally different program.
So it makes a lot of sense to relook at it for multiple reasons.
I'm just saying that we didn't look at any of the things that have been discussed today when we made the map. We just made the map for trying to minimize the amount we were paying to the state fund.
It's good to understand. So I think the biggest point we need to really work on is probably our communication and our process, so we can understand all of this, kind of work together between the two departments. Did I get everything covered pretty much here? Fire, that we talked about, building, sprinklers. Okay, anything else that we need to throw on that? So, like the building permit process, I threw this on here. We put sprinklers under here if you like. But like at the time to grab the building permit and then four-way inspections and the finals for the homes. It seems like we've got a lot of moving parts here and a lot of things to decide on. As was pointed out by both departments, we as a council are the ones to select this person and a few other things. So I just wanted to put this up here to clarify my thinking, so I can understand all the moving parts that we've got here for dealing with. So we can open up a discussion and see if we got it all covered here.
Steve, I'm reminded Greg's on that committee too. Greg, do you want to have anything to that?
Who has the authority to enforce the defense workspace once the building is done?
Would be designated as the code official.
Pardon?
Whoever's designated as the code official.
Well, it seemed to me that you possibly would have two code officials.
Well, that's somewhat the problem. The urban interface code is adopted under Title 14 of the county code. Title 14 does not count automatically without doing anything. Gave Robert the authority. That's not necessarily, you don't agree with that, that's what's being discussed. It's what was kind of done.
Well, from the two presentations today, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see much area for dispute. The building department talked about they're in charge of inside the walls, making sure things are done correctly, the proper construction material, depending on their rating, what needs to be there. The fire department's in charge of everything outside of the building, defensible space, maintaining that defensible space, the water system design in the subdivision, all that stuff. So in your presentation, the only part of the building you mentioned was maybe sprinklers inside the building. But other than that, I didn't see any dispute. It seems like you both lined out what you want to do and what you want to do.
As far as
Other than maybe that one little tweak.
And that's the important thing, is from my perspective, is irregardless of what happens, we still have to work together. We have one purpose of preventing fire, preventing loss of structures, preventing loss of life. It's just defining what needs to be done.
As do they, I believe.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, that's what I said. Everybody's got to work together, irregardless of personalities, whatever it is, for the common goal of life safety.
And I guess where I'd say, it seems like maybe two code officials. The building department would be the code official to sign off the building. The fire department would be the code official to maintain and do all of that stuff that's outside. Sprinklers, or fire plug systems, you know, the subdivision streets, the design of the subdivision, all that outside.
I mean, once we get to the point of filling out the form, the road's obviously in, and checking to see what design requirement it meets. It's pretty simple stuff. I mean, I can go to the design standards subdivision, pull it up online, and see what grade the road is. I know what the design standard was for the width of the road, you know. So I mean, when we require a landscape permit, basically we're looking at what vegetation requirement. The sheet that he showed was a sheet out of the international code, and the state's sheet's a little different, so on the vegetation requirements. If you can compare the sheet.
You're talking about the score sheet.
The score sheet. So they're a little bit different. I mean, it's basically the same thing, but they kind of score out a little different. So in the one written by ICC, it talks about vegetation size, and the one written by the state with the state requirements, it gives tree species of tree,
Specific trees.
and conifers. So it's pretty. So when we go through and do a review on the site plan, I mean, I don't know that anybody's going to come up with a different determination. But again, after we issue after the building permit's finalized out, then who's to say that somebody doesn't come in and plant a pine tree where it's not supposed to be?
And that's where the maintenance part of the code has to be done.
Sure. Well, but it would seem in the building, once that score sheet's filled out, whichever one you use, you guys would look at the part of that that applies to the building, you guys would look at the part that applies to the outside and work together and say, how do these two fit together?
As far as the wildland code and the defensible space,
Yeah.
I mean, right now, the only issue is when you get two different people reviewing, you have two different opinions. And not to say that, and then there's a slowdown. So, I mean, we have a copy of everyone we've approved, and the first year we didn't require landscape plans. After that, we did. We have all those landscape plans on file, and we're pretty careful to make